If I'm a small business working under a big company, what rules do I have to follow?
The short answer is your subcontract.
And so what's the worst thing that can happen if you sign a government contract without reading the fine print?
You go bankrupt. You want to watch for that stuff because, again, that's your Bible. You put all this effort into it, and then they're awarded the contract, and they just don't give you any work because the subcontract terms don't really require them to give you any work, right?
Ooh. What should I tell the insurance guy?
What's my deductible? And what does that mean? And do you have a duty to defend?
So can a small business actually sue a big prime?
So the lawyer answer to your question, Eric, is yes, you can sue the prime. The non-lawyer answer to that question is how much money do you have?
All right. So we were talking offline. If I'm a small business working under a big company, what rules do I have to follow?
The short answer is your subcontract, right?
Okay.
The subcontract's just a commercial contract. I think there's this misconception out there that you have the same rules as the prime and you have to you're just really in a commercial space. So if you are a small business working for a prime contractor, your subcontract is your Bible. And that is why it's so important to really think about whether the effort is worth what's in the subcontract. Right. So often small businesses are like, I just want to get in with this prime. I just want to get in with this prime. I really want to do the work. And you look at we have no negotiating power whatsoever, nothing.
Right.
I just got to sign on the dotted line. But what's the effort worth if you're going to lose a bunch of money, right? Because the payment, you can't enforce the payment terms or whatever the case might be. And a lot of times what you see though in subcontracts is they'll just put the entire contract in by reference.
Yes. Right. Yes, I've seen that. Yes.
Right. It's like, here you go. Everything that's in the prime contract is now in your contract. You want to watch for that stuff because, again, that's your Bible. So if some of this stuff doesn't apply to you or shouldn't apply to you or is going to be additional cost to you, you might want to say, hey, I don't have an issue with those terms, except I'm a small business, so this clause should not apply to me. The other one should not apply to me. Can we accept those because I'm a small business?
Okay, so let's just start out. What is a subcontract and how is that different from the regular contract?
Right, so a subcontract is the document between you, the subcontractor, or let's just call the subcontractor entity B, right? Because I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to say entity B. Entity A has the direct contract with the government. They're the ones that are signing on the dotted line with the government, and they have what we call in lawyer speak privity of contract with the government. Entity A wants entity B to do some work. They enter into a commercial contract between entity A and entity B. That's your subcontract. And so you can have first tier subcontract, and then if entity B subcontracts to entity C to entity D, those are all subcontracts. We call those lower tiered subcontracts.
And so what's the worst thing that can happen if you sign a government contract without reading the fine print?
You go bankrupt.
Hey, do you have a story about something that happened to someone that you know?
Absolutely, so many stories. So the large contractor has a dispute over, and I don't even want to say large contractor. I want to say that entity A, right? Because that entity A could be a small business.
Sure.
But you team with them to go after some work, and then all of a sudden you don't either they don't give you the work that you're expecting to get.
Right.
You went out and you leased a new building. You bought all the equipment that you needed to buy. Right. You've seen this a lot right now with these stop work orders and things like that.
Sure.
So you put all this effort into it, and then they're awarded the contract and they just don't give you any work because the subcontract terms don't really require them to give you any work. Right. So all of a sudden you've got all of these overhead costs and you have no income coming in. Right. So it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can a small business actually sue a big prime if they don't do that stuff?
Well, let's talk. So I think sometimes there's some confusion between that teaming agreement, which is when you're going after the work.
Okay.
That is really hard to enforce in most jurisdictions. So if you start off with this teaming arrangement and you are going to go after this big prime contract with this other company and you're going to make it rain and it's going to be wonderful, right? Everybody's engaged.
Oh yeah.
Thinking about marriage,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right? Everything's perfect.
Yeah.
And then it's a year before that contract gets awarded, and that company A, prime contractor, their circumstances have changed. Maybe they've lost a lot of work. Maybe they got some private equity investment and they really need to make those returns they promised, right? In most states, that work share that was in that teaming agreement isn't enforceable, right? You can't hold their feet to the fire for it. So it's really important when you're talking about those teaming arrangements that you have really thought through, and you know, in an ideal world, you're getting very close to signing that subcontract, and you get that buttoned up and done ASAP. Once you've signed that subcontract, now we have a legal document, right? Now we got something to go after. So the lawyer answer to your question, Eric, is yes, you can sue the prime, right? The non-lawyer answer to that question is how much money do you have?
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
So
right.
you can do a lot of things if you have the financial ability to execute. So that's one thing you want to think about when you're negotiating those subcontracts is, what do I have for a dispute resolution clause in there? Where am I going to have to sue this guy? Because maybe they put the choice of law as Alaska. So that means you're going to have to fly your lawyers to Alaska to litigate this thing, or hire Alaskan lawyers. You know, I looked at a subcontract the other day that was arbitration in the UK under UK law for a transaction that's supposed to be in the United States. So I'm like, so you're really gonna ship all your witnesses across
right.
Okay, if you know, things don't go well. But those are the things you kind of gloss over when you're getting married.
Yeah,
it's really important when you're getting divorced.
That makes a lot of sense. So what other type of shady stuff that we need to watch out for before signing anything with a prime?
Yeah, so the things that I think really get folks in trouble is the stuff that you really don't want to call a lawyer to do, but like you probably at some point need to talk to a lawyer, right? And I'm a lawyer, so I'm biased. Take that for what it's worth. But things like indemnification clauses. Indemnification basically is this concept that if party C sues me, party A, because of something you did, like you screwed up something, somebody got into a car accident on your construction site and I get sued, or an employee sues me and says that I'm a joint employer with you, then you have to pay me all my legal expenses too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really complicated legal language that makes most lawyers' eyes just kind of go, right? And so people skip over it. They don't look at it. And then down the road, they're in these, we have like 3 or 4 of these right now, whether their companies are fighting over who's responsible for the settlement amount. Insurance companies fighting over, well, are you really joint employers? You don't want to be joint employers, right? And it can get really complicated and really expensive. So that legal boilerplate language at the end of those contracts does matter, right? And you should at least talk to somebody on that initial stretch about what all that stuff means so that you can go out and negotiate that smart, right? The other things are, how does your work share read? So a lot of clients come to us and say, well, we were promised 49%, right? And then you look at the language and it says up to 49%.
Right.
So the way that courts are going to look at that, they're going to look at the language on the black and white page first. What is that? What does the print say first? And then if there's some confusion or contradictory language in there, like one part says up to 49% and another part says 49%, then a court might take evidence about what did the parties really mean? What were their discussions? But we don't get to evidence and discussions if the black and white language on the page says up to 49%. You're done at that point.
You're done.
Like, I can't even help you, get, like, what am I going to argue? Those little things where your BD teams and your contract teams are trying to get the deal done. They're trying to get across the finish line. And most of the time, we don't have a problem, right? Most of the time, everybody kind of does what they said they were going to do, and it's fine. But it's that every now and then situation that's going to cost you a lot of money, or you just got to let it go because you don't have the money to sue the large prime, right? And I didn't put in a prevailing parties clause in. So the American system is everybody pays their own way, unless you put a clause in that says, hey, if I win, I get my attorney's fees and costs. So it's those kinds of things you have to think about.
So it's interesting. I've been in that situation with the indemnification clause on a project where someone stole a piece of rental equipment that was on there. They charged it back to me, even though we weren't we didn't have anything to do with it. They had security cameras. It happened like 2 a.m. in the morning. The prime charged it back to me. By the way, they could have made a claim. They decided they didn't even want to make the insurance claim. They're like, no, we're going to charge it back to your subcontract, and you're going to pay for this $50,000 generator.
Right.
That they were paying like $100 a week to rent.
Right.
But the cost of it's like $50,000. They charge it back to my company, and I had to pay it.
Yeah. And if you have a clause in your contract that basically says, like, if we think that you're indebted to us, we can just take it out of what we owe you.
Right.
Then they're in the driver's seat.
Yeah, that happened to me. So that happened to me. So yes, I could attest to that particular situation. Particularly, yes. So I was going to talk about payroll, but before we do that, let's talk about SCA and what SCA means and why people should know SCA.
So the SCA is the Service Contract Act, the McNamara-Harris Service Contract Act of 1965.
Oh, I had to pull it up to make sure I had that right. So I literally have it here. In the
FAR, a couple years ago, they rewrote the FAR right there. Yeah. They rewrote it. So it's the Service Contract Labor Standard. So if you look in the FAR Part 22, you're going to see Service Contract Labor Standards, at least for now. We'll see what happens with the FAR. So it's statutory. It was passed by Congress. It's kind of like the baby sister to the Davis-Bacon Act, which covers prevailing wage in construction. So it basically is like, hey, if you have a service worker, we call it a service contract, but these contracts that are majority for services. When we say majority for services, we mean like hourly workers. They could be administrative workers. They could be food service workers, gardeners, nurses. There's like a whole laundry list of positions. You have to pay them certain wages and fringe benefits as minimums, right? It's not a max, it's a minimum. And there are all these like fun rules. It looks kind of simple on the face, like a lot of these things do. And then you start peeling back the layers, and it's like, well, you have to do vacation in a certain way, and you have to do sick leave in a certain way. And how do you determine whether someone's a service worker or not a service worker? And that takes you back to the Fair Labor Standards Act, exempt, non-exempt, salaried, hourly. So it gets complicated. I do like 3-day trainings on this. There's a lot of weird little quirks, but I've really come to appreciate, the system. But it is a little bit complicated. But the idea is that we're paying people these, what they call prevailing wages in these certain counties based on a wage determination that should be attached to your contract. So it's all contractual. So if you don't see it in your contract, it's not there. It doesn't exist.
Oh, so we can't presume because we have a professional services contract, it's in there.
No.
Okay.
No. It's
well, that's
all
good
contract, right? Yeah. And that's really important because there's this whole price adjustment system that's attached to it. So the idea is like, hey, you get a wage determination at the outset, like when you're bidding on it, you should see that wage determination. Okay. And that should gives you or a collective bargaining agreement, which I tell clients, if you see a collective bargaining agreement in there and you've never dealt with labor, you should like abandon ship or seek help.
Yeah, I've never dealt with a collective bargaining agreement, but it doesn't sound like something I want to get involved with.
It just adds a layer of cost and complexity if you've never done it before. So you should be, it's like use your phone a friend to whoever that friend is, right? And figure out if you even want to go after this thing. But it's important that it's in your contract and you don't presume it, because if you presume it, you might end up paying higher wages than you need to, which could disqualify you, right? Especially if it's a low price contract. And the other reason is that every year of that contract, a new wage determination goes into your contract with the contracting officer. So it's not like one wage determination for the life of the contract. There are certain rules about when contracting officers have to put a new one in, and you get price adjustments to your contract based on those new wage determinations. So it really impacts how you price the contract from the outset, from, before you're even awarded the contract. The SCA, really impacts how you price it and how you can recover those increases that occur over time. And it all has to be in your contract for you to take advantage of all those things. So
how do you make money if everyone's pricing the same thing for the wages for the workers?
Well, that's, they want you to think about how many workers do you really need to do this work? Can you do things with, say, part-time people or temporary people? Can you, and it depends on the type of contract, right? Like, can you build in efficiencies somewhere and process? If the contract says you're going to have 25 people on this contract, and they're a help desk contract, and it has to work 8 to 4 Monday through Friday, then we're really talking about your fringe benefit margins, right? The other issue is you could say, well, the SCA WD rate for this position is $15 an hour.
Okay.
But I'm in a locality where realistically I can't hire people for $15 an hour. So the question is, do your competitors know that? Is it just a race to the bottom, right? Or not? And that's a question mark. But you really end up in classifications. Can I rearrange classifications to save some money? Can I reorganize the work? If I can't reorganize the work, and how much do my project managers cost? How much do my exempt people cost? How much is my overhead? How do I save on fringe?
Yeah. Sounds that way. It sounds that way.
And your margins aren't high. Look, most of my clients that do this work say one of the, you can get volume, right, in SCA contracts, but your margins tend to be much tighter. A lot of them are issued as like low price, technically acceptable contracts. So
is there a way that a small business can ask for better payment terms or changes in our subcontract? Because you said before, we all feel like we're at the mercy of these people.
Yeah.
What tricks or tactics have you've seen people use to get primes to essentially help get better terms?
Well, how valuable is what you're bringing to the table, right? So how are you unique? How are you going to save them in other ways, right? So I think, and I'm going a little bit more into like my BD brain and just conversations that I've had with clients over the years, right? But in those conversations, it's like, we'll pay you a little bit more if I can't just sub you out with someone else, right? So if there are 5 companies that are the same value proposition to a large prime, why would I pay you more when I can go next door and get the same thing?
Okay.
So you really have to think about what's your value add. Like, why pick me? Well, we're more efficient. Look at our success record. You could go with the lowest price, company, but they have it always takes them longer to complete the task, or they don't do it well. Sometimes, especially if we're talking about service work, we're talking about, they look at their turnover rate. We have information that suggests their turnover rate is a lot higher. With this type of work, you really have to retain people. If you want to retain people, you got to pay them a little bit more, but we can get it done on time and we can perform really well, right? But you got to make that case to them.
I like that. Can a small business get in trouble for using freelancers or 1099 workers?
Oh yeah, this is a big issue in GovCon. Maybe under this administration, DOL will back off a little bit. Maybe they'll go back to, they already kind of have gone back to, viewing independent contractors under like kind of a looser test. But what I tell clients is legally, like there's the legal question, and then there's but everybody wants to be a 1099. So what do I do? Right? I hear that all the time. Like,
sure.
These people have been 1099s forever. It's how they've organized their lives. They've been able to pull this off with every contractor they've worked with. They don't want to be an employee. So, but I got to get them. They're key, and they know they're key. So I empathize with that. And my answer is, you just have to be willing to take the risk. And then we start talking about what that risk is. So that risk is overtime, possibly, right? If the federal Department of Labor comes in and investigates you and says, well, these guys should have been employees and they've been working 60-hour weeks, you could get hit with overtime, basically. They just presume they're hourly and then charge you overtime. That can be expensive. But in my experience, federal DOL is not the biggest problem. It's state and federal tax, workers' comp, it's unemployment claims, right? And particularly in this environment where contracts get terminated, people don't have as many options as they used to have. So they're filing unemployment claims, they're filing workers' comp claims, they're filing discrimination and harassment claims. And they're saying, I know I have this independent contractor agreement, but I wasn't an independent contractor, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden you've got, Virginia Department of Taxation on the line,
Right.
trying to get their money. They want their money. There are also certain, you can't forget state law, because state law is probably the bigger issue for most contractors. There are certain states where it's just really tough to have independent contractors. California, Hawaii, New York, New Jersey, kind of DC, Massachusetts. They use a different test. We call it the ABC test. But the idea is that if that independent contractor is in your line of work, they're not an independent contractor. And they want things like, when these agencies call you, they're asking you for well, does this person have a website? Do they have a business card? How many clients do they have? They're their only client. They work for 40 hours a week and they're sitting right next to all of your other people.
Right.
It's real hard to get around that. And then you got to pay the back taxes. You have to pay their employment tax. You have to pay all these things, and the tax stuff can get particularly expensive.
That's a really good point that I think, again, like you said, I did not think about at the state level, how that's the pain. That's where that's the pain is the state level. Yeah.
And maybe you get lucky. I've had clients that say, I've worked with independent contractors for 20 years. I've never had a problem. It's never a problem until it's a problem, right?
Sure.
It's just like anything else. And you can say, I accept the risk. That's totally fine. You're probably not going to get suspended or debarred over it. You're probably not going to jail for it, but you might get hit at some point. I have a client right now that an independent contractor filed a workers' comp claim in the state of New York.
Okay.
For carpal tunnel syndrome or something, or their back hurt, because they sit every day forever. And New York has this system where basically they presume employment, and we don't really have what we need other than an independent contractor agreement under New York law. So in New York, they're going to have to pay out of pocket for all of this guy's medical for however long it takes. And it's going to go through a New York workers' comp process. He wasn't covered by their workers' comp policy, which means they have to pay it out of pocket. It can get kind of nasty sometimes.
And, it's interesting because, to your point earlier, even if the person asks for it, they go, no, this is how I used to work. When something happens to them, they're not going to remember that conversation. They're going to be like, yeah, I know we talked about it, but no, they're going to say, I never said that. I always wanted to be an employee. You suggested, people.
And it doesn't matter. They could have a signed affidavit saying, I requested to be an independent contractor. And the law does not care.
Oh, it doesn't care.
It does not care.
Oh, okay.
It
That's
presumes
really bad.
all of that classification risk is on you as the employer.
Okay.
It absolutely does not matter how much they wanted it. They can change their mind at any time, or the government can change their minds for them.
Okay. You mentioned about contract cancellations. So if I have a contract that was promised gets canceled or delayed, do I have any rights as a subcontractor?
So again, look at your subcontract. But if most subcontracts have those termination flowdowns or stop work flowdowns from the prime contract, and you should be entitled to the same remedies as the prime contractor, assuming we have those flowdowns, right? The things that can get sticky, again, this goes to those dispute resolution provisions in the subcontract. Does the prime contractor have any obligation to pass? You have a claim, but you can't submit your claim directly to the government because you don't have privity of contract with the government. So all of your claims have to go through that prime, right? So ideally you have something in your contract that says they are obligated in good faith to pass through the claims under those FAR clauses through to the government. That way, if they don't, you have a breach of contract claim and can go after the prime, right?
Yeah.
You also want something about appeals in there. So sometimes you have primes come back and say, well, I did pass it through and the government denied it. I'm done. Because if you want to appeal the denial of a claim, that has to be sponsored by the prime contractor, right? So you need something that says, hey, prime, you will sponsor my appeal. You don't have to pay for the legal fees, but I need you to like sign the appeal so that I can appeal the denial of my claim.
Okay.
I'm not going to pay it unless they get paid by the government, right?
Right.
And they don't necessarily want to get tangled into, if they got paid or they don't have anything outstanding, they don't necessarily want to be involved in an appeal, right? So it's good to have those tools in your toolkit if you can negotiate those.
Okay, that makes sense. If we're starting out, what are some of the ways that we can protect ourselves, right? Is there an insurance policy I can buy against all this stuff? Can I just buy like a blanket coverage that I'm like it's like the what do they call the Golden Dome?
Right.
Can I buy a Golden Dome policy?
Yeah, that's real expensive. So I would probably say most things can be underwritten and insured at a cost.
Okay, it's just really expensive.
So your business liability insurance, depending on the package you buy, you want to ask about that, right? So let's talk about insurance. Insurance salesmen are great salesmen. They're going to tell you you're protected for everything. You read the policy. It's real boring.
What should I tell the insurance guy? What should I tell him?
You should say, like, ask. And if you need someone the list of questions you should be asking is what's my deductible? And what does that mean? Right. So, and do you have a duty to defend? So a lot of the cost is in lawyer cost, right?
Right. Yes.
So you want your insurance policies to have a duty to defend so that if you get sued, they have to defend you, right? They have to.
That happened to me. That happened to me, and it saved my butt.
Yes.
That I didn't know that's what it's called, but that happened to me. Oh my gosh, it was the biggest blessing. I had never knew I needed.
Exactly.
Duty to defend. That's what it's called. Okay.
Duty to defend.
That happened to me. Oh my gosh. I was sued by a big prime, and literally going back, kind of, we were talking about your sister earlier, but I didn't know anything. I was so dumb. I was like, okay. He was like, you should just call your insurance company, see if they'll pay the claim. I'm like, all right, well, that's better than me paying $700,000. I called the insurance company and they go, we don't pay claims, but we'll cover your attorney's fees.
Right.
And I go, okay, is that better? He's like, yeah, because So he's like, you don't have to do anything.
Right, you don't do anything. It goes to these insurance defense lawyers. When I started my legal career, I worked in insurance defense. Great way to learn, right? And so they send it to their insurance company lawyers, and they litigate it for you, right? Or they'll settle it for you. Yeah. So it's really important because often the lawyer costs exceed. If you're looking at a $50,000 claim, litigation is going to cost you more than $50,000, right? And so as a small business, you're probably like, well, I'm stuck. I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. Right. So, but if you have somebody to pay the lawyer fees and you have a good case, great. That can be better than some types of coverage that have really high $100,000 deductibles for X amount of coverage. Right. So that it's kind of like looking at your health insurance. It's
another
great
boring
if it's 80%, right? But what do I have to pay before I get to the 80%?
Yes.
Or high deductible plans. Great, they pay 100%, but I got to pay the first $10,000.
Right.
I don't have $10,000. The same concept on regular insurance, right? So it's really important. Certain claims are not often covered by insurance. Wage and hour claims, so misclassification, right? Not often covered by insurance. Sometimes you can get a rider for those policies, but they're expensive. Employment practices liability, that's going to cover things like discrimination and harassment claims. It's usually, that's why it's important to read your general business policy, because those claims are exceptions to those general business policies. You have to get a separate employment practices liability insurance to cover that, or directors and officers insurance. So when you look at that base business policy, you're going to see this long list of exceptions like death,
Yes.
outside, all the big ticket items that they don't want to pay for. And that affects your premiums, right? So, I say EPLI insurance is something that I would say is not on the have to list, but if you can get a good rate for it, it can be beneficial if you get sued by an employee. But again, it's not going to cover wage and hour class action lawsuits because you underpaid people in California or didn't pay their travel expenses or their cell phone bills. It's things like that can be really expensive.
Okay. I mean, I just threw out insurance. I mean, it didn't have to. It didn't have to be insurance. It could have been something else that could help protect this.
The other big things is like you just, if you're going to own or manage a GovCon business, you gotta read. You gotta know what you're signing up for,
right?
And you got to be prepared to accept certain risk, especially if you think that you don't have a lot of negotiating power and it's like the standard MSA that this big business gives every small business and they're not going to negotiate anything. In my experience, if you are valuable enough, large businesses will negotiate their MSAs. They just do. Right. If you're fungible, they probably won't negotiate anything, right? Right. I mean, but it's really the stuff we talked about is understanding your risk, asking questions ahead of time. If you don't understand something, it'll save you a lot of money down the road. And you just have to constantly be educating yourself. It's impossible to know everything, right? You just have to know enough to know when to ask a question. That's it.
No, that's true. I have a different question. I have someone now, and this has happened in the past where people have reached out to me because, again, my background is construction. So typically I get Davis-Bacon wage questions.
Yep.
And they said, well, Eric, I didn't pay Davis-Bacon wages on this contracts. And it happened, last year. I mean, I know someone that's going through it right now, but where, they're the prime, they subcontract out to someone else, that person subcontract out to someone else, and then that second tier sub is providing the labor on that contract.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've never heard this before. This is
never.
So,
and in construction, is it even flow down? Like half the time in construction, there's no flow down even.
There's no flow down. Yeah. So, what are the potential things that could happen to this particular company?
So everything flows up, right? So it's kind of like it's going to flow up until there's nobody else to flow up to, right?
Okay.
And you could be suspended and debarred. That's the worst thing. Yeah, that's the worst thing. So Davis-Bacon is the Department of Labor would recommend suspension and debarment. Service Contract Act, which we talked about earlier, it's automatic suspension and debarment unless DOL recommends otherwise.
Wow.
So it's a big deal. I will tell you, practically speaking, DOL doesn't want to refer people to suspension and debarment. They will, if it's a good faith mistake, But what happens in construction a lot is that those lower tier subs disappear. They're just nowhere to be found. They're gone. They've moved to Idaho. You can't trust them.
No shade on Idaho. No shade on Idaho. We love Idaho.
I say Idaho is, I know you can hide in Montana and Idaho.
Right, there you go.
I'm from Montana.
Well, I know you can hide in Florida too, so.
Exactly. Like Gator Traz or whatever.
Yeah, we can hide in Florida.
So if the third or second tier sub doesn't pay, then you go up one. And that contract, assuming you've done all your flow downs, right? That's why your flow downs are important, right? So you got to flow Davis-Bacon down from that first tier sub to the second tier sub to the third tier sub.
Hold on, wait, excuse me.
Yes.
Okay. I think I misstated it. They are supposed to be performing a percentage of the contract with their own labor.
Okay.
That they're not even doing that.
They're just not doing it. Yeah. So what do you have do you have a contract or do you have like a task order? Like sometimes this.
It's a small business contract and they're supposed to be doing, I guess, 51%.
Oh yeah. And they're not doing it.
They subbed it out to someone else.
Yeah, you're sunk. You're done.
They subbed that out, and then that person subbed it out to another person who's then providing 100% of the labor.
Yeah. So if we're talking limitations on subcontracting,
right?
Yeah, unless that business is similarly situated.
No,
right?
they ain't similarly situated.
They're not similarly situated.
But that's a good out. That's a good out.
That's a good out. So if it's just small business, the first thing I ask is, are the other businesses small, right?
Okay.
But if it's like WSB or 8A or whatever it is, and you just kind of cross your fingers and hope you don't get caught. If you get caught, you're in breach of contract and all the things. They can terminate for default and all the horribles that could happen downstream can happen.
That's and then let's go back to the other case where the person did not pay the Davis-Bacon wages, and it's 2 years later. What potential outcome could happen to that in that situation?
So
you have to pay it back.
Yeah, you basically they'll calculate back wages. So if Department of Labor comes in, they look at who's affected, they calculate back wages. Usually in Davis-Bacon, it's the fringe that gets you because the fringe is high. Right. If things are really going wrong, and it's not just a Department of Labor investigation, but one of these workers got a lawyer, they complain to DOL on the wage side, and then they file a False Claims Act lawsuit against you because you got to do weekly certifications on Davis-Bacon Act contracts that say I've paid the appropriate wages and fringe. And every single certification is a false certification to the government if you've misclassified people or you haven't paid them correctly. So savvy plaintiffs lawyers go straight for QTAM action, False Claims Act, right? They get an addition, they get all their wages paid, they get a percentage of recovery, they get all of their attorney's fees paid, and they probably have a class action, right? So that's worst case scenario. Sure. If it's just a DOL investigation, just a DOL investigation, then it's going to be back wages. And then if the tiny guy down at the bottom of the rung of the ladder didn't have the flow downs, then it's going to flow up to you. If he can't pay and he goes bankrupt, it's going to flow back to you. So DOL can't get the money out of the second tier sub. They go up the lines, and sometimes they just go straight to the prime and say, you better cut the check, right? Which is uncomfortable. And if it's the prime that does it, they go to the contracting office and then they withhold on your contract. Yeah, it's fun.
Okay, fun stuff. I think we beat the subject pretty much every which way. But again, these are questions that they're just not, those are not common things knowledge that people have that we learn in school or college or anything like that. So
it's just learning through life, right?
Learning through life. So what else are you seeing out here in the small business community, in the small business world that are impacting people?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody just wants a degree of certainty right now.
Yeah.
Right. I think if I had a theme for this year, and I think that's true under most administrations, just to be fair, right? Whenever things start changing, most businesses say to me, I may not like the policy, but what's more important to my business is consistency. Because I'd really like to hire a BD person or an HR person, or I'd really like to do these things with my business, but I can't until I have some degree of confidence that I can forecast based on the contracts I want to go after and what I have. And so right now it's a lot of questions, like legal questions about those kinds of things, and a lot of concern in the small business community that more and more of this work is going to get shifted to subcontracting, right? With GSA consolidation and things like that. There's just a general worry and sense that we are looking at moving from prime positioning to subcontract positioning. Right. And that's not an exciting proposition to be in for a lot of contractors. On the other hand, I have some clients that have only subcontracted for years, and they love it because they don't have to do a lot of the stuff that primes do. They're not kind of under that microscope, and they stay away from prime contracts. So we'll have to kind of see, but that's a lot of a lot of, the worry. And of course, people, can I retain people? How do I manage this return to work environment with my people, that kind of stuff.
Well, we have just under 100 days left for the fiscal year, and we still haven't, touched the budget. I mean, what do you I'm like, what do you think is going to happen?
So,
I mean, you've been around 15 years, like,
yeah. So this is I think, and I could be wrong, I hope I'm wrong, but I think there's not going to be a lot of new procurements coming out. I think the administration wants to test what we call pocket rescission, which is they wait until the end of the fiscal year and then they don't spend the money that Congress allocated to them. And we're teeing up for a fight at the Supreme Court about whether that's legal or not legal. This administration takes the position that they are not required to spend the money that Congress allocates to programs to spend, which is, if you've read the Constitution lately, which I'm sure all of you have, right? Read the Constitution lately.
Last week.
Yeah, that would be it would be a very strange position to be in, because the idea is that Congress is supposed to be running the show. They have the power of the purse. The executive is supposed to do the things that Congress tells them to do through laws and appropriations, right? You got to have a law and appropriation. So we're kind of that fight is going to be very important for contractors. So I know it's a lot of like law and constitution, and there's been a lot of noise about a lot of things, but that is going to be very, very important for contractors and for the dynamics between Congress and the executive branch. So we're watching that very closely.
That's a very interesting. Do you have any type of numerical value of how much dollars or percentage of dollars that we tend to stand to not be spent? Or
I have no idea, but I think it's in the billions.
Well, definitely in the billions. We're in the billions now.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Do you have any historical context where this has ever happened before?
Yeah, so it happened once. I'm going to get the president wrong, so don't quote me on this. I want to say it was like Johnson or something like that. I can get that for you. But one time this happened, but on a much smaller scale, right? And that's how we got this name, pocket rescission. But it was a small enough amount that Congress didn't really press it that hard, right? It was kind of like Congress is upset about it. Everybody kind of moved on. There wasn't like a huge legal challenge over it. This administration wants to do it on a much, much, much larger scale to really challenge what we call the Anti-Impoundment Act. It's a lot of laws coming out of me right now. But the Anti-Impoundment Act basically says that the executive branch or the president can't just keep money that Congress wants it to spend. It's got to spend the money, right? And there's an act called the Anti-Impoundment Act. And this is all gearing up because this administration wants to be able to say, well, laws are just suggestions, and I don't have to spend the money on anything I don't want to spend the money on, right? So I fully expect this to get teed up to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what happens.
So you taught me something new today, pocket rescission. That's okay. I'm reading it, and this is. I won't say it's great. It's happening. It's great that I'm learning about this, because you're saying that there's a possibility that we may not spend the actual money.
Yeah, which is a big deal for contractors.
It's a new position that I've not heard yet.
Yeah. So it's and that's a couple months away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pocket rescission, a standard rescission similar to the process described, where the president sends a rescission message to Congress. Okay, fewer than 45 days left in the fiscal year, and opts to withhold or pause obligations within the message.
Yeah, so they basically just send a note to Congress within that 45-day window and says, hey guys, we're not going to spend all this money. And then there's like nothing Congress, especially in this Congress, that they're going to do about it, right? And so that someone's going to have to challenge that. And everybody knows it's coming. It's like folks are gearing up for I'm sure there's going to be several legal challenges, and it'll go to the Supreme Court for sure.
Yeah, I mean, wow.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay. Well, now I got to look out for that. So we got to talk about pocket rescission now.
We can do a whole nother one of these on pocket rescission.
Okay. I have really. So you know about pocket rescission?
Yeah. I mean, I've been relearning all this stuff.
Okay.
Comes. Yeah.
All right. Rarely use power to override Congress on spending. Pocket rescission.
Yeah, we're pulling a lot out of the ancient playbook these days, right?
I like it. I mean, I'm kind of a nerd, so this is fascinating. Yeah. I don't like it for us because I just, and historically we just spend all the money at the end like we've normally done.
Right. Because we're supposed to, right? And programs had an incentive to, because if they didn't spend all their money, then Congress can pull it back and say, well, you didn't need all the money. And now we have the opposite happening where the executive is like, no, I don't want to do all of these things that Congress said I was supposed to do. So I'm just going to hold the funds and direct agency heads not to do anything about it, and then notify Congress 45 days in advance and try to pull back the money. Say, here, you can have your money back, Congress.
What would they do with it if they got it back? I mean, what's the point of getting it back?
The Treasury. It goes back to the Treasury. It's like unallocated funds. It's like unspent money.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm interviewing an economist later today, so I'll ask him.
Yeah, ask him if he knows about it. I'd be very curious to see what an economist says about it, and what the impact on the economy will be if the government just doesn't spend appropriated funds.
Yeah. That's a good question to ask.
Yeah.
I'm here to help. That's a good question to ask. Huh?
I said I'm here to help.
No, that's good. Thank you. Thank you for planting that seed. Yeah. That's good. That's now I have a new direction to have a conversation about. So
yeah. Well, I would be surprised if he wasn't following it. Oops, what did I do? I think, sorry about that.
Yeah. So no, I'm sure. He focused on domestic, let's see, issues of U.S. domestic economic competitive trade policy, U.S. Economic tools and foreign policy. I served as a White House Senior Director for International Economics, National Security Council, and National Economic Council. You should definitely know about this. He suggested some EOs for supply chain resilience under the Biden administration. And so, serving a Biden-Harris transition team, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Counter Threat Finance, Sanctions, and State Department's Bureau of Economic Business Affairs, Policy Planning Staff, State Department. So, Henry he should be well versed on.
So that would be like pocket rescission, and the Anti-Impoundment Act will be
what act?
The Anti-Impoundment Act.
Anti-Impoundment
Act. So I'm trying to find GSA head. It's Stephen. What's his name? Stephen. He's the head at GSA. He's really good on this.
Okay.
Akian, I think is his last name.
Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we close out and then we could look it up afterwards. Yeah. So we'll close out. People have to see us doing our due diligence over here, figure this thing out while we're here. Right.
Both of those things work together. That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll look it up briefly. But no, this has been great. I'm learning so much, and happy to share with everybody all of these exciting times that we're in. And it's a lot of uncertainty, but I agree that legal counsel and legal representation, because there's too many tricks and curves and things to maneuver. And I like to focus on what I'm good at. I can't also be I can't be an accountant and a lawyer and a hairdresser.
Well, neither can I. I mean, lawyers have lawyers and accountants and
accountants. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Well, why don't you close out with some things for small businesses, positive things. How's it?
Yeah.
So that's on a positive note.
Like my positives are everybody is in the swim lane together, right? And that creates more opportunities for strategic and creative thinking, really trying to take advantage of, where this administration is going. And the sooner that, we can do that, I think the better. So I think there will be some unique things that come out of all of what we would call the uncertainty of today. There will be strategic advantages, great teaming opportunities. We can provide feedback on like different ways to do things to make things more efficient for the government. I don't think that we should all assume that we're out, right? I do think there are signs that the administration wants to hear from us. And while there is an eye to reform, we can have a voice in that. So my advice would be, don't sit on the sidelines, get in the game, right? Sit on the sidelines, you just live with the outcome,
Right.
So, think forward.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
thanks for having me. So much fun.